The woman's eyes met his through the shattered doorway. She flinched. Not away from him. Toward the corner, where something small and breathing lay hidden beneath debris. The British soldier raised his rifle. His finger rested on the trigger. In that fraction of a second, he understood that what happened next would define everything that followed. The house was supposed to be empty. The entire street was supposed to be empty. Intelligence had said so. Intelligence had been wrong before. For months now, British forces had been pushing deeper into occupied territory. The advance was methodical, brutal, grinding. Every mile gained came at a cost measured not in numbers, but in the weight soldiers carried in their sleep. Germany had fortified these towns with the precision of desperate men. Every building could hide a sniper. Every cellar could conceal ammunition. Every civilian could be a spy, a partisan, a threat wearing the face of innocence. The soldiers' unit had orders. Clear the sector. Secure the route. Move forward before nightfall. Behind those words lay the unspoken reality. Assume nothing is safe, trust no one, hesitate, and you die. The offensive had momentum now. British commanders could feel it in the way German positions crumbled faster than expected, in the way resistance fragmented into pockets of chaotic defense rather than coordinated counterattack. But momentum meant nothing to the man standing in that doorway, watching a woman shield something with her body. The town had fallen 3 hours earlier. Fallen was the word used in reports. On the ground, it meant British artillery had turned stone buildings into hollow shells. It meant German soldiers had withdrawn or surrendered or died in positions they'd held for 18 months. It meant the local population emerged from basements and bunkers, blinking in daylight that revealed their world transformed into rubble. The soldiers' platoon had been tasked with final clearance, room by room, floor by floor. Look for weapons caches, hidden combatants, booby traps left behind by retreating defenders. They'd found all 3 that morning. His name was Private Thomas Henley, 23 years old. Before the war, he'd worked in his father's shop in Manchester, measuring fabric and making small talk about weather and cricket scores. Now he measured distances in terms of cover and exposure. Now his small talk consisted of whispered warnings about tripwires and the hollow sound floors made when mines were buried beneath them. The house on Bergstrasa had been marked for clearance at 14:30 hours. Standard procedure, announce entry, wait 5 seconds, throw in a smoke canister if there's no response, enter with weapons ready. Henley had done this 47 times in the past week. 47 times he'd found empty rooms or cowering families, or once, memorably, an elderly man who refused to leave his piano and played Beethoven while British soldiers searched his attic. The 48th time, he found her. She wore a grey coat too large for her frame. Her hair, light brown and tangled, fell across a face carved hollow by months of siege conditions. She couldn't have been more than 25. But her eyes held the exhaustion of someone who'd stopped counting days and started counting heartbeats. And she was terrified, not of him specifically, of what he represented, of the uniform, of the rifle, of the power to decide who lived and who didn't. Henley had seen that fear before. It was different from the fear of soldiers facing combat. Soldiers feared death but understood the rules. Civilians feared randomness. They feared that survival depended on factors beyond their control, on the mood of whoever held the gun, on luck that could evaporate between one breath and the next. "Kommen Sie," Henley said. His German was terrible, learned from a phrasebook and refined through necessity. "Come out." She didn't move. Behind him, Henley heard Corporal Davies, clearing the upper floor. Boots on wood, the creak of doors, the scrape of furniture being moved aside. They had maybe 2 minutes before Davies came down, and the situation became someone else's problem. Henley stepped into the room. The woman's hand moved toward the corner, protective, instinctive. "Waffe?" Henley asked. "Weapon?" She shook her head violently. "Nein! Nein, bitte!" And then he heard it. A sound so quiet he almost missed it beneath the distant rumble of British armour moving through adjacent streets. A whimper, small, young, frightened beyond the capacity for words. Henley's grip tightened on his rifle. Orders were clear about civilians found in combat zones after surrender deadlines, especially civilians hiding in structures marked for demolition, especially those who didn't evacuate when given the chance. The reasoning was sound. Partisans used civilian shields, hid weapons among families, staged ambushes from positions of apparent innocence. 3 days earlier, a British sergeant had let a group of civilians pass through a checkpoint without thorough searches. One of them had been carrying grenades. The explosion killed the sergeant and 2 privates who'd been sharing cigarettes nearby. After that, thorough became ruthless. Compassion became liability. Trust became the thing that got you killed. Henley took another step forward. The woman moved with him, keeping her body between the soldier and the corner. Her lips formed silent words. A prayer, maybe. Or a goodbye. "Show me," Henley said in English, then tried again in broken German. "Zeigen Sie mir." She looked at him then. Really looked. Searching his face for some indication of what would happen next. Some clue about whether the next few seconds would end in mercy or tragedy. What she saw, Henley would never know. Slowly, she stepped aside. The child was perhaps 4 years old. A girl, he thought, though it was difficult to tell beneath the dirt and the oversized clothes. She sat wedged into the corner where 2 walls met, knees drawn to chest, face buried in her arms. She was trying to make herself invisible. No weapons, no threat. Just a terrified child who'd learned that silence meant survival. And suddenly Henley was back in Manchester. Back in the shop where mothers brought their children to be measured for school clothes. Back in a world where children laughed and complained about standing still and begged for sweets while their parents counted coins. This child wasn't begging for anything. She'd learned not to ask, not to hope, not to believe that tomorrow might be different from today. "Is this your daughter?" Henley asked the woman, though he already knew the answer from the way she watched the girl. The woman nodded once, sharp, frightened. "You were supposed to evacuate," Henley said, knowing she probably didn't understand, but needing to say it anyway. "The order came through yesterday. Everyone was supposed to leave." The woman said something rapid in German. Henley caught fragments. Krank. Sick. Nicht gehen können. Couldn't go. Versteckt. Hidden. She'd hidden the child because the girl had been too ill to move. Had stayed behind because leaving would have meant abandoning her daughter. Had gambled that remaining in the wreckage was safer than risking the evacuation routes where refugees were sometimes caught in crossfire between retreating Germans and advancing British. It was a calculation Henley understood. Not through training or orders, but through the part of him that remembered being human before he became a soldier. Davy's boots sounded on the stairs. Henley had seconds now, maybe less. He could follow protocol, report the civilians, let command decide their fate. It would be the correct decision, the safe decision, the one that couldn't be questioned later. But Henley had seen what happened to civilians caught in the machinery of military processing. Detention centres overcrowded with refugees and prisoners. Interrogations conducted by men too tired and too suspicious to distinguish between enemy sympathisers and innocents trying to survive. Families separated. Children lost in systems designed for efficiency rather than humanity. The girl hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound beyond that single, involuntary whimper. Her silence was worse than screaming. "Sir!" Davies appeared in the doorway, rifle ready. He took in the scene immediately. Woman, child, Henley standing between them, and standard procedure. "Clear," Henley said. Davies frowned. "Sir, there are civilians." "I said clear." Henley's voice carried the weight of something that wasn't quite an order, but felt like one. "House is empty. We move to the next sector." For 3 long seconds, Davies said nothing. His eyes moved from Henley to the woman to the child and back to Henley. He was weighing options, calculating risks, deciding whether to challenge what was clearly a violation of protocol. Finally, Davies nodded. Once, slow. "Clear," he repeated. Then softer. "Your call, Tom." They left the woman and child in the corner of the shattered house. Henley didn't look back. Looking back would have meant acknowledging what he'd done, and acknowledgement would have meant thinking about consequences, and thinking about consequences would have made it impossible to keep moving forward. The offensive continued. British forces pushed deeper into German-held territory. Towns fell. Supply lines extended. The momentum that commanders felt in briefing rooms translated into miles gained on maps, into positions captured, into the slow, grinding transformation of occupied Europe back towards something approaching liberation. Henley's unit participated in 17 more clearance operations over the following weeks. They found weapons caches and enemy holdouts and civilians who'd hidden in cellars and attics. Each time, Henley followed protocol. Each time he reported what he found and let command make decisions about detention and processing. But at night, when exhaustion finally dragged him towards something resembling sleep, he thought about the woman in the grey coat, about the child who'd learned to be silent, about the 3 seconds when Davies had decided whether to report him. He wondered if they'd survived, wondered if the house had been struck by artillery in subsequent fighting, wondered if staying had been mercy or if he'd simply delayed an inevitable tragedy. The offensive ground forward, relentless and impersonal. Germany's defensive positions crumbled under sustained pressure. Each victory was measured in territory gained, in casualties inflicted, in strategic objectives achieved. But for the men conducting clearance operations, victory was measured in smaller units, the rooms searched, the decisions made, the moments when training and orders collided with the stubborn, inconvenient fact of individual human lives. Henley never spoke about the woman and child, not to Davies, who carried the secret with equal silence, not to the chaplain who occasionally asked if men wanted to unburden themselves, not in letters home where he wrote carefully sanitized accounts of daily life in occupied territory. But something had shifted. In subsequent operations, when protocol demanded one thing and instinct suggested another, Henley found himself weighing options he'd never considered before. Found himself asking questions that weren't in the training manual. What happens after I leave? What becomes of the people caught in the machinery? Where does following orders end and moral responsibility begin? These weren't questions with clear answers. War didn't provide clarity. It provided situations where every choice carried consequences, where mercy could get people killed and ruthlessness could save lives, where the line between right and wrong blurred into something that depended entirely on perspective and timing and luck. The British offensive continued to pressure German defences. Towns were taken. Lines were pushed forward. The strategic situation evolved with the methodical certainty of overwhelming force applied consistently across multiple fronts. But for Private Thomas Henley, standing in doorways and making decisions that would never appear in official reports, the war became something different, something personal, something that couldn't be reduced to maps and objectives and casualty statistics. 6 weeks after the incident in the house on Bergstrasa, Henley's unit was rotated back for rest and resupply. They spent 4 days in a requisitioned building that had once been a school. Davies found cognac in a cellar. They drank it sitting on steps overlooking a courtyard where children had probably played before the world turned to ash and rubble. "You think about them?" Davies asked eventually. Henley didn't ask who he meant. "Every day," he said. "Me too." Davies studied the cognac bottle like it might contain answers. "I filed a report saying the house was clear, put my name on it, made it official. You didn't have to do that." "Yeah, I did." Davies took a drink. "Because if I hadn't, I'd be the kind of bastard who lets someone else take the risk alone, and I'm tired of being that kind of bastard." They sat in silence as evening turned to night. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled. The sound was constant now, a bass note underlying every moment, every conversation, every thought. "You ever wonder if we made the wrong call?" Henley asked. "Every day," Davies repeated. "But I also wonder what the right call was, and I haven't figured that out yet." The next morning, Henley's unit received orders for redeployment. New sector, new objectives, the same grinding advance through territory contested meter by meter. Before they moved out, Henley pulled Davies aside. "If something happens to me," he said quietly, "there's a letter in my kit. It's got details, address on Bergstrasa, description of the house, what I saw inside." Davies' expression didn't change. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because if we made the wrong call, someone should know. Should be able to find them. After." Henley paused. "And if we made the right call, someone should know that too." Davies considered this. Finally nodded. "I'll make sure," he said. They shook hands. Brief, formal, an acknowledgement of something that couldn't be spoken aloud, but existed nonetheless between them. British forces maintained pressure across the front. German resistance, though fierce in pockets, showed signs of systematic strain. Supply lines were disrupted, communications were intercepted. Defensive positions that had held for months began to crack under sustained assault. In briefing rooms and command centres, officers spoke of momentum and strategic advantage and the inevitable conclusion of overwhelming force. On the ground, soldiers like Henley conducted operations that would never make headlines, cleared buildings, secured positions, made decisions in seconds that would echo in memory for decades. The war didn't pause for individual conscience. It rolled forward with mechanical certainty, crushing everything beneath it. The guilty and innocent, the prepared and unprepared, those who followed orders and those who questioned them. There is no way to know what happened to the woman and child in the house on Bergstrasa. Records from that period are incomplete. Buildings were destroyed and rebuilt, populations displaced and scattered. The machinery of war obliterated individual stories beneath the weight of larger narratives. Perhaps they survived the remainder of the fighting. Perhaps they found safety in the chaos that followed Germany's collapse. Perhaps they became two more names in ledgers of displaced persons, refugees processed through camps and transit centres before being absorbed into whatever version of normal life eventually emerged from the rubble. Or perhaps they didn't survive. Perhaps the house was shelled in subsequent fighting. Perhaps they starved waiting for relief that never came. Perhaps staying had been a death sentence Henley simply delayed by a few days or weeks. The offensive continued. Britain advanced. Germany retreated. The strategic picture evolved according to patterns studied in military academies and analysed in historical texts. But in the gap between strategy and execution, between orders given and actions taken, individuals made choices. Some followed protocol. Some improvised. Some carried the weight of those choices for the rest of their lives. Decades later, when historians wrote about the final months of fighting in occupied Europe, they focused on casualty figures and territorial gains and the collapse of German defensive structures. They wrote about strategic decisions made at command levels, about the coordination of artillery and armour and infantry, about the inevitable momentum of overwhelming force. They did not write about a British soldier standing in a doorway, finger on a trigger, making a choice that wouldn't change the outcome of the war, but might change the outcome for two lives caught in its machinery. They did not write about the 3 seconds when Corporal Davies decided whether to report a violation of protocol, or the letter Henley kept in his kit, or the cognac shared in silence while artillery rumbled in the distance. Those stories existed in the margins, in the space between official records and individual memory, in the quiet acknowledgement that war is fought not just with strategies and weapons, but with thousands of small decisions made by exhausted men trying to reconcile training with humanity, orders with conscience, survival with the stubborn belief that individual lives matter even when the larger machinery suggests otherwise. The woman flinched in terror, and what the British soldier saw changed both their lives forever. But change doesn't mean resolution. It means carrying weight. It means living with uncertainty. It means understanding that some questions have no answers, only the echo of choices made in moments when there was no time to think and too much time afterward to wonder. The offensive continued. The war ground forward. And Private Thomas Henley walked through doorways, searching rooms, making decisions, carrying the weight of what he'd seen and what he'd done, and what he'd chosen not to do. That weight never grew lighter. It simply became part of the load soldiers carry long after the fighting ends.